Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Tidal Flooding Talk, brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition. We are here with the whole gang. Finally, it's been a few weeks, but we have Dan Skeldon, Palma and Joe. Dan, the gang's all back together. You got a fresh haircut. Is that just for the occasion? Did you get a Tidal Flooding Talk haircut?
I always try to improve myself somehow, physically, mentally, before every Tidal Flooding Talk episode. So this week's improvement was a haircut, yes.
Okay, got it. All right, that's good to know. And Palma, you always look very nice. So, no real improvements needed on your end, but, Dan
Joe,
did get
quick
the fresh cut.
question. Your New Year's resolution, can you touch your toes yet?
Oh, good question. Let's try. I'm going to switch the layout here. Let's see if we can do it. I forgot. I actually tried to get a sponsorship for this. I don't know. Can we see? I think we can try it. Let's see.
Oh, you're almost there. I think it's an
Yeah,
improvement.
Now,
I'm
when,
like lower
honestly,
shin.
when was the last time you tried to touch your toes? Because most people give up on their New Year's resolution by like January 21st. So have you made any progress since then?
I have practiced. Yes, I actually did try to touch my toes. Let's see. Today's Wednesday. I think Sunday,
Good for
actually.
you. That's great.
Yeah, but I need like a foam roller or something. I think that's what I'm gonna need to do to improve myself. But I should take a page out of Dan's book and try to do something more actionable, like maybe get my hair cut to improve myself rather than I don't know if I'm ever gonna touch my toes, guys. I think that's just where I'm at. Touching our toes, I don't think has anything to do with this episode. We'll see. We are going to bring in Megan Linkin. She is a senior vice president of alternative risk transfer at Swiss Re. She is going to talk to us about a paper she did, I believe, about 12 years ago at this point. She'll correct me with the date. Yeah, she's nodding her head. Yeah.
Yep.
About how, Sandy was bad. But it's not a worst case scenario for the Jersey Shore. And she's going to talk about what that looks like. So, Megan, welcome to Tidal Flooding Talk. And also, I'll ask, can you touch your toes? Are you someone who can touch your toes?
Can, because I do yoga all the time, Joe. So if you want to touch your toes, highly recommend picking up the yoga practice.
Okay.
That is a good way to get yourself flexible enough to do it.
Okay. Maybe I won't do the foam roller then. I'll do yoga and we'll go from there. Okay. All right. Keep that in mind. All right. So let me start with this. I don't know if this has much to do with your paper here, but what is alternative risk transfer?
Yeah, so I work for Swiss Re Corporate Solutions, which is the direct insurance arm of Swiss Re, which is a very large global reinsurer. And in the alternative risk transfer team, I focus on parametric natural catastrophe insurance products. So, and they're part of the alternative risk transfer portfolio, let's say, because they are just not your traditional property insurance programs. Parametric insurance programs determine payout based on the intensity of the event that causes the loss. So, for example, when we write a parametric hurricane policy, we'll look at what the wind speed was at where the insured has locations. Or we'll look at what was the Saffir-Simpson category of the storm as it tracked through some sort of geometry, maybe a circle or a box or another type of polygon around the client's location. And clients really like these because it allows them to recover funds for things that would not be covered under their regular insurance policy. So like business interruption, and if they wind up shutting down and they lose business for a few days and they need to recover some operational revenue, the proceeds of our insurance policies can be used to kind of act as that buffer on the balance sheet. Again, in the case of hurricane, any sort of preemptive investments that are made to prepare for the storm would be eligible for coverage. So it really, using parametric insurance products in conjunction with traditional property insurance really allows our clients to kind of expand their coverage against earthquakes, hurricanes, severe convective storms, floods, and other natural perils that are out there.
Okay. That's like a world that I'm still learning about every day. And you definitely helped me there. Let me ask you this. As a meteorologist, and yay, Rutgers, go both of us, go RU.
Go Knights.
Go nice, that's right. Is that something that you like wanted to do when you graduated college? I know you have your PhD, of course. I should have said Dr. Megan Lincoln, my apologies. But is that something you knew you wanted to do, like kind of getting out of undergrad, or how'd you get into that?
Yeah, I actually had no idea that I could even go and work in the insurance industry. I was finishing up my PhD. I went to as you noted, Rutgers for undergrad. I went to the University of Maryland for grad school. And at the time I was graduating, I either wanted to stay in DC and work on public policy or move back to the New York area. And I figured work in finance because I had heard of weather derivatives, which are very similar. They're the same type of index solutions, but they would use weather variables like temperature, accumulated rainfall, growing degree days, heating degree days, cooling degree days, etc. So I had heard of the concept and I thought, oh, that's a way to move into the corporate world and move back to New York and or the New York area. And I just threw my resume up on a bunch of job websites and thought, let's see if anybody bites. And I was approached by a headhunter who was looking to fill a job in Swiss Re's research and development team at the time, which is known as the catastrophe perils team. And they were looking for somebody who had an advanced degree in atmospheric or related science to build what are known as catastrophe models. And these are models that underwriters use to assess the loss potential caused by natural disasters like hurricanes, earthquakes, etc. So I interviewed for the job. This was all the way back in March of 2008, and I started at Swiss Re in July of 2008 and have been hanging out in the insurance industry ever since. And it's actually a really interesting way to make a living. Not something I ever thought I'd be doing, but it does allow me to do all these cool projects like this research project that I did on the 1821 hurricane now quite a while ago. But also just kind of see it working in the space I do now, really seeing how we can increase the applications of insurance to help our clients recover after a natural disaster. Because at Swiss Re, our mission is we make the world more resilient. So we're always looking for ways to improve how the insurance market can address these underlying financial or the financial impacts of these natural disasters that happen.
Now, from your research, what would it look like if the 1821 hurricane would hit today?
Yeah, so let's set the stage. The 1821 hurricane was a hurricane that occurred at the very beginning of September of that year. And it took a track that is thought to be similar to Hurricane Irene. So obviously, we did not necessarily have the weather observation networks and platforms that we do today and the continuous monitoring of all these events. But when you go back in time and you read through the weather reports that were available at the time and you collect them and organize them, what it sounds like is that the storm took a track very similar to that of Hurricane Irene, but that it was significantly stronger. It was not a Hurricane Irene when it made it this far north, made landfall as a tropical storm near, I believe it was Little Egg Harbor. But this storm, based on the reports that were available at the time, was thought to have been likely a very strong Category 2 or a Category 3 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale, which would mean wind speeds somewhere in the storm, maximum between 100 and 120 miles an hour, which is much more significant than we saw with Irene.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, 1821, I mean, no one's alive to remember that. The weather records are pretty scarce, but can we use like a modern day measuring stick like a Sandy or, maybe a 62 storm if we want to go back a little farther as to how much worse the 1821 storm would have been? Is it Sandy times 2? Is it Sandy times 10? It's just something to compare in modern terms.
Yeah, so I think that if we look at the New York City area further north, we're looking to storm surge that's comparable to Hurricane Sandy. The reports at the time were that the lower Manhattan would have been flooded to about Houston Street. And while Sandy didn't lead to that kind of flooding in Manhattan, it partially didn't because the tunnels were there to be filled up, which at the time in 1821 they were not. But I think the unique thing that the 1821 storm and Sandy is that the 1821 storm would have affected the entirety of the coast of New Jersey. There were reports of significant storm surge in the Cape May area, in the Atlantic City area, in the Monmouth County area, and then in New York City. Where Sandy, where the storm surge hit, it was absolutely devastating. I mean, my family has a house in Lavallette, and we saw firsthand how devastating the impacts of Sandy were down there. Southern New Jersey was simply just not hit as hard because of the approach that Sandy took and its angle of attack on the coast of New Jersey. So I think we would see much more widespread impact from the flooding for a storm that was as strong as the 1821 storm. And then the other factor would obviously be the wind. As mentioned, the weather reports that were available at the time suggested that it was also a wind event as well. And Sandy was not a wind event. So coupling the surge with the winds mean that you would have an event that would lead to hundreds of billions of dollars possibly in physical damage, long-term economic impacts, and it would be something unlike this area has seen yet, at least in modern times.
Yeah, and Megan, if you said this, I apologize, but wasn't Sandy, if we're adjusting for today's dollars, about 36 billion in damage?
Yeah, I believe Sandy was 36, roughly like 35 to 40 billion in damage, but that's probably physical damage, so direct physical damage. I have not seen a number in recent years that has detailed the long-term impacts of the storm on, I mean, the Jersey Shore, which is economically very important for the state. We drive down there, there's still lots that have not been redeveloped.
Uh-huh.
And this year will mark 14 years.
Yeah, and time flies, man. I don't know. It's crazy. Time flies, and there is a generation of people, who weren't old enough for Sandy or just weren't here, right? And we talk about that all the time. Let's take our first break. We're gonna come back with more from Dr. Megan Lincoln here on.
Hello, welcome back. You are watching Tidal Flooding Talk. We are brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, and we would like to remind our viewers that floods happen all over. Think you're not at risk? Floods happen in every U.S. state, and not just in high-risk zones. Even a few inches of water can cause thousands of dollars in damage. Check your flood risk at FEMA.gov and stay informed.
All right, and we are back here talking about the paper that Megan put out here. We were kind of saying a little bit off camera, but there's probably a good a good percentage of people who are not here at the shore for even Sandy, which is now 14 years ago. Scott Wall, shout out to Scott Wall in Avalon. He says in Avalon, the new homeowners, are there, or homeowners are there for an average of 9 years, right? So that you're talking over 50% of people who were not there in 2012. When you look at, what could be a worst case scenario for the shore, is there something that you think of in terms of, well, hey, not only could this theoretical storm come, which would be stronger than Sandy, but we're going to have that generation of people who were not even around to say, I remember when.
Yeah, and I think that there's always the concern that any warnings will not necessarily be taken seriously enough. I think we saw that a little bit actually between Hurricanes Irene and Sandy, because an evacuation order was issued along the shore for Hurricane Irene. People thought, oh, it wasn't that bad. And then a year later, the evacuation order was issued for Sandy, and some people stuck around. And when that happens, obviously you put yourself in danger, you put the first responders in danger, and it's just really important that these storms are not to be taken lightly. They're not to be taken casually, and if evacuation orders are issued, go and listen to them, and no physical property or stuff is worth your life.
Yeah, Megan,
Now, oh,
are
go
the
ahead.
numbers in your report like another tool to kind of hopefully get across that message, the cost, just the damage that a storm like this can do? A meteorologist can throw out numbers like, all right, we'll have 120-mile-an-hour winds, we'll have a 10-foot storm surge, but just the scope of the damage, the potential damage, like echoed in your report, is that another tool we can use to hopefully kind of get the message out that, hey, this worst case scenario is possible?
Yeah, and I think it's also important for emergency managers, coastal planners, governments across all levels, state, county, municipal, important for businesses, important for homeowners. Like you said, you can talk about winds being 120 miles an hour at a certain location. You can talk about storm surge in feet, but I think what really delivers the message home is, what does that look like financially? And again, that's kind of how the insurance industry, and me having a background in a science, how like my skill set can be leveraged by the insurance industry, is we can translate these events into loss potential.
Got it. Got it. What about in terms of what you've seen, with let's talk about sea level rise, right? I mean, we've seen 18 inches of sea level rise since about the year 1910 along most of the Jersey Shore. You say that 1821 hurricane, let's just say that that same thing was coming here again. Do we know how much sea level rise we've had since 1821? I only know back to 1910, but even if you don't, what this can you talk about the sea level rise alone and the impacts that has with some kind of future storm that's coming?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important consideration is that so obviously we have our tidal cycles, we saw during Sandy. Sandy made landfall at pretty much the worst high tide cycle possible because it hit during the king tide, which is the highest high tide, every 6 months. Dan, you probably know better than I do. I'm really remembering that definition from way back in the day now. But when you have this persistent background sea level rise from both climate change and then the subsidence, so the sinking of the land in the area, you're then just giving the storm a higher baseline to start from. And there's just more water available to be pushed on shore.
Now, this might be a hot take, but do you have a take on when they changed the name from Hurricane Sandy to Superstorm Sandy? And did that translate in terms of the damage that we incurred?
Yeah, I think with Sandy, one of the things that always came up when I was talking to folks, again, 14 years ago or 13 and a half years ago, and its aftermath is if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck. Maybe from a very strict meteorological perspective, it was not considered a hurricane anymore by the definition of in the glossary of meteorology that I have sitting on my desk here. But at the end of the day, it was a 1,000-mile wide former tropical cyclone that had a central pressure of 941 millibars, or roughly 940 millibars at landfall. So it was, no matter what you called it, it was going to bring hurricane conditions. It was going to bring major storm surge along the coast, which is exactly what we saw. It was going to bring widespread storm surge related damage, which is exactly what we saw. And I think we also saw the National Hurricane Center kind of course correct after that. They transitioned to using the phrase, I don't remember them using the phrase post-tropical cyclone before Sandy. And I think that they now monitor and track these storms until they've dissipated and continue to issue hurricane watches and hurricane warnings, or tropical storm watches and tropical storm warnings, even if by the very strict meteorological definition, it's not a tropical cyclone anymore. It's no longer a warm core weather system. But, from a science communications and emergency management perspective, if it's going to bring 13 feet of storm surge, it doesn't really matter if it's warm core, cold core, subtropical. It's going to have that impact, and people are going to probably respond with more urgency if you hear the word hurricane.
Yeah, we saw. I think now there would still be hurricane warnings if a storm like Sandy came again to the Jersey Shore. I want to go back to this 1821 hurricane. I'm sorry I didn't ask it earlier, but just generally when you're researching, you said, what observations were there and where are you looking for these observations? I'm curious because not even newspapers were really around at that point. So how are you finding this data? How are you doing that research?
Yeah, there were a couple of newspapers at the time. Cape May obviously was America's oldest seaside town,
Yeah.
was in existence then, and there were reports that were out of Cape May. There were reports that were actually out of Norfolk, hence the name, the 1821 Norfolk Long Island hurricane. So Norfolk was a established settlement. New York City was an established settlement. There's a great book which is somewhere on my shelf. I'm trying to see if I can see it. It's like early American hurricanes between 1492 and sometime in the 19th century, and that was the main source. I think it was written by David Ludlam, and he collected information about all these storms. And it was actually the 1821 hurricane that allowed, or that resulted in, scientists starting to understand that they rotate counterclockwise, and they rotate, period.
Hmm. Okay.
Hey, Megan, I
Interesting.
actually like going back to Palmer's question too. I like when they called storms that, the Long Island Express, the Norfolk Long Island Hurricane, more than just the names, the Ash Wednesday storm, the Five High storm. I don't know. I just like that better for naming, a little more unique and a little more easy to place. But just my 2 cents.
Yeah. Megan, where are you on naming winter storms? while we're asking the hot questions.
Naming winter storms, I guess it's a fad and a trend.
Okay.
I feel like hurricanes, there's at least the National Hurricane Center has put forth criteria that must be met for a storm to be given a name and for a storm to be christened by them and numbered, christened, what have you. Whereas, yeah, I feel like winter storms, it's what some entities do, and if that's how they find it best to communicate. Again, I still feel like I refer to them as the blizzards.
Mhm.
So we had the blizzard of 2026, and then we had the late January snowstorm of 2026, and we had a mid-January snowstorm of
Yeah.
2026. It was like never ending, but
Hey, well, I know you're further north than us here. It was our sleet bomb that we had in January. We had our 2.5 inches of sleet where I
ugh,
was. Not much.
yeah.
It was a little snow. Anyway, let's take our last break here. We'll come on back in just a second on Tidal Flooding.
Welcome back to this week's Tidal Flooding Talk, continuing our talk with Dr. Megan Lincoln. Megan, I wanted to ask you a question about, let's just say something like the 1821 storm hits. Northeast corridor doesn't have to be a Category 5 storm like you get down in Texas or Florida. Is that the worst case scenario in terms of dollar amounts for the insurance industry, just because you have the Northeast corridor and the increased population? And if it's not, what would be the worst case scenario as far as an East Coast hurricane goes for the insurance industry?
Yeah, to be honest, Dan, it's been a minute since I've looked at those numbers in detail and like parsed like what's the worst from an insurance industry perspective, where would the largest loss come from? But what we do know is that if a hurricane were to hit the Northeast quarter, we're talking billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. Miami obviously is very heavily developed. Tampa, also billions of dollars. So we see these areas that are some more prone than other, where the impact, again, it would dwarf some of the other more recent events. And I mean, I think one thing that's important is thinking, even over my years in the insurance industry, there is very infrequently a landfalling hurricane in the United States where the impact is not billions of dollars. We have so heavily built up along the coast and we have so much exposure along the coast that even a hurricane that affects a more sparsely populated area, the numbers go into the single billion of damage.
But what about, let me ask you this on a positive note, like, we do see towns that are have and do continue to take steps to be more coastal resilient, raising of the homes. We're seeing more of that in New Jersey. Like, are those things that from the insurance perspective you're taking into account as well?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't really work on the traditional property side anymore,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
Swiss Re doesn't issue homeowners policies. But yeah, I mean, generally, any resiliency effort is going to be viewed favorably by the insurance industry. Any steps that people take to mitigate their exposure to flooding, to wind, it's going to be beneficial for all parties. There was a figure, I mean, again, I'm probably going back to roughly when this paper was written in 2014. So prior to my current role, I actually worked on our public sector team where we focused on developing insurance solutions for government clients, which is partially how I got my start in the parametric insurance space, since they're, the insurer of last resort and the first responder after a natural disaster. They need funds. But I remember a stat, I think it was from 13, 14, or 15, 20, 13, 14, or 50, where it was like for every $1 invested in resilience and mitigation, it's $4 in savings.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. Why are you
Do you,
laughing?
well, I'm just thinking, so with these standards, do you feel that businesses go above and beyond to be more prepared, just to like, or do you think that they just do the minimum to, you know, meet whatever requirements they need to so that their insurance doesn't go up, or that they meet the town's requirements? What is your experience with that?
Yeah, I don't really, again, it's been so long since I've worked on the traditional property insurance side. I can't really comment on that.
Yeah, no worries. That's fine. We're actually coming up to time, so probably a good time to we'll close the book on this, and we appreciate your time talking about Sandy and worst case scenarios. We're going to end this, though, the way we always do, with the one thing we can't stop talking about, tidal flooding or otherwise. I can't stop talking about that all three of us are here for an episode of Tidal Flooding Talk. But Dan, I'll let you kick it off with a proper send off.
It's mid-April, so I can't stop talking about how much I have to owe in taxes and how I wait to the last minute to send in. When I get the refunds, I always file my taxes as early as possible. Now I'm filing on April 15th because I owe. So nothing exciting, just tax day, depression setting in.
Wow, Dan, I'm sorry that you're always owing. You always owe. Is that how it is?
Yeah, at least a little bit. I mean, it used to be like a huge refund. Now I owe a little bit, and tax day isn't as exciting as it used to be.
Got it.
Also, I guess I'll have a positive one too. Coming
Okay.
up on the big 50th birthday in a couple days. And at this time, I will be somewhere in the Northeast for a surprise trip with my wife and my best friends. I'm guessing the Berkshires or Catskills, but we'll find out next week, I guess.
When you say your
That's
best friends, you
fun.
mean
A
yeah, it is
surprise
fun.
trip,
Yeah, a little more positive than tax day. Maybe I should have gone with that one.
That's all right.
ending on a high note.
Yeah.
Good, Palma.
Yeah, well, speaking of birthdays, my daughter will be turning 3 in a few days, so that's
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
exciting.
Okay.
Great age.
Yeah, it really is. It's a lot of fun. And Dan, I have to agree with you for taxes, ever since I got married, I tend to owe. It used to be like not that way, but whatever. It's
I
worth
thought
it.
getting married was like a tax benefit. Isn't that what they tell you? It's like a tax
I guess
benefit.
for him, but
I know, I know, I know. I think mine has changed too. I mean, we've owed more. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm in the same boat too. I don't know. All right. What do I have? I actually don't have much today. That's a shocker for me. We talked about touching my toes already. I don't know. I know. How about this? This is I'm doing a New York City 5-borough bike tour in a few weeks. We'll have to give you the recap on this. So that's my exercise. Maybe after that, maybe it'll stretch out my hamstrings enough where I can touch my toes. But
There
otherwise,
you
I
go.
don't have much for you there. Have you done the bike tour, Megan? I feel like you have.
Not. No, I have not done the 5-borough bike tour, but I have friends who have done it, and they say it's great.
It's
It's
an awesome
it's
experience.
yeah, it's like marathon kind of vibes
Yeah, I would
where
say.
people are out cheering, waving at you as you go past.
Yeah, yeah, and like honestly, going like them closing 6th Avenue and riding uptown on 6th Avenue, it's just like, you and the bikers and all the skyscrapers just like I'll never forget like that sight. Like you'll never get that, only at the bike tour or maybe the marathon, but the bike tour is not a race, so I don't have to, ride 45 miles. But anyway, I digress, Megan. Go ahead. Yeah, we'll end it with you.
Oh, what can I not stop talking about? I can't stop talking about how cold this past winter was
Mm,
and how ready I am for summer and for Memorial Day, which is rapidly approaching,
yes.
and that I feel like I can taste those 85-degree beach days and sitting at the shore with not a winter jacket and a hat and gloves and a scarf. I feel
Yeah.
like winter 2025, 2026 might have scarred me from the cold.
I don't think you're the only one.
Yeah, definitely
There's
not.
yeah. All
even
right. Well,
Dan, our like snow enthusiast, said enough is enough
Yeah, I
towards the
raised the
end.
white flag this year. Absolutely. I'm even not a summer lover, but I'm looking forward to it this year, probably more than any other.
all right. Well, Megan, thank you again. Where could people find more of your work or if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Megan Linkin, Linkin, like the band, not like the president. And yeah, that's the best place to find me, I think, to see more about what I'm doing, what Swiss Re is doing, and how we're making the world more resilient.
Awesome. We love it. Well, Megan, thanks again for hopping on Tidal Flooding Talk. We will be back with everybody next Tuesday with a new episode. If you have podcast ideas, please let us know. You can send us an email. You can send one right to me. That's going to be joe@cupajoe.live. That's joe@cupofjoe.live. And we'll be back with you in your feeds next week. Take care, everybody.